Dr. L here. God damn it, dirty son of a bitch. This is not what I risked my life for in Vietnam. Watching George Floyd murdered under the knee of a policeman is way, way, way too much. I'm glad the graphic image of his murder has mobilized people around the globe. It is about time. When I first got to Vietnam, I had to wait a week before my in-country checkout in my O-1 aircraft. I was a forward air controller. In that week, I realized I could be killed in this war. I pondered the question, is anything worth dying for? My conclusion at the end of the week was yes. One thing is worth dying for: freedom. It was not freedom for whites, Catholics, evangelicals, Democrats, Republicans. It was freedom for all. Every person created by our Creator was created equal as a child of the Almighty Creator. Everyone deserves the chance to fulfill the purpose for which she or he was created. I am thrilled to see the worldwide mass protests. Protests helped bring the Vietnam War to a close. Hopefully they now can help bring systemic racism to an end. This generation protesting should know that they can bring about change. The worldwide view of the war in Vietnam was changed by two photos. A photo of a South Vietnamese army officer executing a Viet Cong prisoner, and the photograph of a young girl naked with her skin burned and her clothes burned off by a napalm bomb. Those photos changed the world. Hopefully the photo of George Floyd will do that. The photos are now of the murder of George Floyd and of the peaceful protesters being attacked with tear gas and rubber bullets by their own government. This has to stop. Now. I'm 78, and I'd like to live long enough to see the world a better place. It won't be easy, but maybe some reflections about my life as an unconscious racist may help. I grew up in Grizzly Gulch in the Black Hills of South Dakota. It's a rural area. I was born in 1942, so in the 50s and 60s is when I grew up. In the Black Hills, everybody knew everybody. A kid could not get away with anything. There was this Black Hills wide grapevine via party line telephones. On those party line telephones, there were no secrets because everyone could eavesdrop, and they did. In the Black Hills, Lead and Deadwood were small towns divided into ethnic regions. We had a region for the Finns, a region for the Swedes, the Jews, the Polish, Hungarians. During the Gold Rush, there was a Chinese region, but there was no black region. We called each other slurs. I was a Finn and proud of it. We were different from the Swedes and Norwegians, and we thought, of course, superior. Then I learned from my Uncle George that Finns were descendants of Chinese hordes who rode across Asia into Northern Europe, intermingled with the Finns, then moved south and raided Europe. I infuriated my half-Swede mother by telling him we were all really Chinese. My grandfather, my mother's father, was blinded as a young man when one of his kids brought him a blasting cap, asked him what it was, and it blew up in his face and blinded him. So he couldn't work, but he was a good babysitter, and he babysat me a lot when I was young, like 3 or 4. He'd sit in his rocking chair and tell me stories. He grew up in Kentucky, and he told me stories about the South. And he used the N-word, but he told me that if you ever had a black as a friend, you would never have a better friend. And that stuck in my young mind. Now, I wasn't aware racism was around me, even though there were no blacks. There was no TV in those days. Yes, you're watching a video by a dinosaur. After dinner, we used to play hide and seek. And after the seeker had found everyone they could, and when they gave up, they'd call, all the auction free. The last one in is, yes, N-word, baby. We didn't think about it. We just repeated it. We learned it from the older kids who learned it, handed down probably through generations. That's institutionalized racism. But I learned in grade school that America was a melting pot. Unfortunately, that was all about melting pot of the European immigrants. But then I learned in school about the Civil War, and I began to learn about the history of the blacks. Blacks were brought to this country to be slaves. That gave the young America an economic advantage. Here's a struggling young country that just won its freedom from England, the dominant military and economic power of the world at that time. How did it rise to become America? First, we had economic resources in New England. The water mills could run factories. The tall pines let us build ships that were faster than any other ship on the planet, called Yankee Clippers. When we built the Erie Canal, we could connect that region through the Erie Canal down the Mississippi to the Deep South, where they raised cotton. And the economic advantage there was the cotton was raised by slave labor. So America was built on the backs of those slaves. But in grade school, I became fascinated with the story of Lincoln having the courage to free the slaves. I was fascinated by this man's individual courage. I memorized the Gettysburg Address. I found a book in my high school library. It was a trilogy of 3 books about Lincoln. I checked it out. I hadn't finished it by year end, so I did. Yeah, I stole it. I kept it. I wanted to learn about this man. Now, I met my first black man at the age of 15. This was during the Korean War. B-52s from B-36s from Ellsworth Air Force Base in Rapid City flew overhead daily. And in the papers at night, I kept track of the MiG count as the MiGs and the Sabres battled over Korea. So one day I decided to go up to Lead. I'm 15, I just got my driver's license, and I decided to go up to buy some glue at the hobby store. On the way I ran across a young black airman hitchhiking. I stopped, picked him up, gave him a ride, dropped him off where he wanted to go, and went home. I told you there was a grapevine. About 3 hours later, my father came home from his job at the sawmill, and he was half owner of a sawmill in the Black Hills. And he said, "I heard you gave a black airman a ride." I said, "Yes." And all he said was, "Good for you." My father was a man of few words, but a man of action. Probably helped that next door to us lived a Sioux family, Sioux Indians. At one point, Wilbur needed more room in his house. My father helped him split that house in two, roll the two halves apart on logs, fill in the middle, and make a bigger house. So my dad, honest to God, did not see color. He'd been a Finn and persecuted. He didn't see any difference with the Indians, and he probably didn't see any difference with the blacks. He was all about hard work and doing the right thing. I was fortunate enough to go to the Air Force Academy, and one of my classmates was black. One of the first blacks admitted to the academy, I believe. His name's Fred Gregory. He wound up being an astronaut. At one of our reunions, I took a picture of Fred up to him and asked him to autograph it, which he did, and I gave it to my son Mark to motivate him towards science. So, after the academy, I went to pilot training in Enid, Oklahoma. Enid's a rural town. Did not go into Enid much, mostly stayed on base as a young bachelor, and didn't have a lot of money to spend. Wasn't much to do there. After pilot training, I was assigned as an instructor pilot to a place called Craig Air Force Base, Selma, Alabama. This is 1 year after the march from Selma to Montgomery. One year after the Edmund Pettus Bridge became famous. Boy, did this Yankee boy get an education. I'd read about the Civil War, Lincoln freeing the slaves, etc. But I'd only met 2 blacks in my life before. I dated a girl from Montgomery. She taught me that Yankee boys don't know squat about what life is about in the South. So she proceeded to try to educate me. She explained to me that there were white elite, the white with money, and the police. The white trash, those people who's economically were not doing much better than the black people and the black people. In Selma, there was only one restaurant where you could get steaks. It was on the outskirts of Selma, and it was called Mama T's. Segregation was illegal. The blacks were supposedly free. So, to avoid legal problems, Mama T's was a private club. You had to be a member. I found out soon enough that my membership card was simply my white face. I didn't like that, but I saw two worlds, an Air Force world and a civilian world. I rented a duplex with another instructor pilot called Bob Wilkerson. This duplex is an old, big antebellum house divided in the middle. In the front were living room, middle of the house were bedrooms, and in the back were the kitchens. In the other half of the duplex, there was a young woman who was an airman's wife. He was stationed in the Philippines, and she was living there with a young son. So, and Helen struggled. Her husband didn't always send home the full paycheck. Sometimes he lost some or all of it gambling. So Bob and I decided to pay Helen to be our maid. We're lazy bachelors. Hey, this worked out good. So one day, after flying in the morning, at Craig we flew a morning shift like from 6 o'clock until 2 in the afternoon, and then afternoon/night shift from noon until about 8 o'clock. So one morning after flying, when I got home, or it's early afternoon, I went in the back and Helen asked me if I wanted a cup of coffee. So I walked over and sat down in her kitchen having a cup of coffee, chatting with her, and the doorbell rang. So she said, just a minute, ran out to the front to see who it was, and came scurrying back. And she says, it's my brother, he's a policeman, don't say anything. Don't say anything that you don't have to. So this guy comes in and he is a big burly ape in blue. And he struts in, greets me, asks me if I'm an airman out at the base, and I say yes. And so he talked to his sister, and after some small chit-chat, he says, just checking on you. He leaves, says, good to meet you, and all that. After he left, she explained to me he was a KKK member, Ku Klux Klan. I'd read about him, I'd heard about him, I'd never met one. The night before, they had tarred and feathered a white man for dating a black woman. Wow. Tourist camp just off the base. I needed some bedding. I looked up in the phone book what stores in Selma had bedding, and found one. Their ad looked nice, so I drove across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, parked my car, looked at the street signs, and oh, okay, it's down here on the left. Right then I noticed that the street on that side of Main Street were not paved. And everyone on that side was black. You know, I didn't think much of it, but they all stepped off at the sidewalk and let me pass. I got to the store and told them what I wanted. I got great service, great prices, and went home. So I got what I wanted, but it's very clear to me that this is a different world. On base, in my flight, we had a black instructor, Captain and then later Major Chuck Guthrie. We all liked Chuck. Chuck was a very competent pilot. He helped get me checked out and educated as an instructor pilot. One night we go out to night fly, the two of us, and the flight line was black as could be. I says, Chuck, where are you? And he says, wait a minute. I'll smile and you can see my white teeth. So that was Chuck's humor. So it was traditional that when someone left the flight, usually for an assignment to Vietnam, that we had a going away party. We had a problem with Chuck. We could not have his going away party at Mama T's. So young captain in my flight, who was been flying reconnaissance RB-52 super secret missions over Russia. He said, I'll arrange it. He went over to Montgomery and arranged this going away party for our whole squadron at the Blue Moon Cafe in Montgomery, one of the top cafes in Montgomery. The room we rented was about 1/4 or 1/3 of the entire restaurant. He just neglected to tell the restaurant manager that our guest of honor was black. The manager didn't realize it till we walked in, and then he couldn't do anything about it because it was a big chunk of money for him. All the wait staff was black, and boy did we get service, and boy did we celebrate seeing Chuck off well. So at that point, I thought I'd evolved pretty well. Then I went and served my tour in Vietnam, and after Vietnam, I went to the University of Wisconsin. This was during the Vietnam protests, and while I was a graduate student at Wisconsin, the Kent State shootings occurred. Protesters, National Guard, too much pressure, and students died. That made me sick. Peaceful protesters. Then there were some non-peaceful elements, rabble-rousers. The Weathermen were one of the groups. They set off a nitrite bomb under the corner of the math building and blew it up. They killed a researcher. So I went to class for the next 3 weeks under fixed bayonets. So I've seen the tip of a police state. After Wisconsin, I went to a teaching job at the Air Force Academy. We had on-base housing. And the on-base housing where we were had 4 houses on a cul-de-sac. One of our 3 neighbors were the Honesties, Maynard and Evelyn. Turned out they were black, but that didn't make any difference. They were just very nice people. Both of us were raising kids together. When I saw while we were there, their son Jason was born. I thought he was one of the cutest babies I'd ever seen. So we traded babysitting and helped each other out. So that was what we did. So I thought I was pretty evolved. Then the shit hit the fan. I was teaching an electrical engineering class. 20 cadets, 3 black. I'd given my lecture, and near the end of the period, with about 10 minutes left, I sent them to the blackboard to work some problems. And as I was getting close to the bell, I wanted them to hurry up and get to their seats, finish their problem, and sit down. So I said, out of my mouth popped, "Last one done is an N baby." I could not believe it. It just came out of my mouth. I asked the 3 black cadets to stay after class, and I immediately apologized to them. Told them I do not know I know where it came from, but it's not in my heart. It was programmed into me. Well, they reported me. Fortunately for me, and this is where the hand of God comes in, they reported me to Maynard Honesty. my next door neighbor. He turned out to be their air officer commanding. He called me on the phone and asked me what happened. And I explained it to him. He said, fine, okay. So he told the cadets to let it go, that it was not how I really felt, but just one of those things. I did not realize that I was, at least unconsciously, a racist. Maynard saved my career. To me, his black life mattered a hell of a lot. Since then, I've learned a very interesting fact. On a safari to Africa, I saw casts of the first footprints of Homo sapiens walking upright. This is near the Ngorongoro crater in what is now Tanzania. DNA studies now show that the world population spread from that region around the world. The world population grew from a black population. Skin pigment changes came about as adaptations to different climates. So if we go far back in our family tree, it isn't like, Mom, we're all Chinese. Mom, everyone, we are all black. For all of us, Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. All of us can do better. All of us can build a better world. So please, let's get it right this time.